Close your eyes, or simply let your gaze soften. Allow your thoughts, restless and hurried as they are, to drift away, like smoke from a dying ember. We are taking a slow, measured journey, a descent into quietude. Tonight, we do not seek drama, but the soft, monotonous details of a place long faded into legend. We are traveling back, far back, across the epochs of time, landing gently in the coastal air of Egypt, specifically the grand bustling city of Alexandria around the 3rd century BCE. But we will not rush toward the noise of the harbour or the blinding light of the Pharos. Our destination is quiet, scholarly and immense, the Great Library, housed within the precinct of the Mouseion. The Mouseion, or the Shrine of the Muses, was not merely a library in the sense we understand the word today. It was a research institution, a temple to learning, a kind of ancient university where the greatest minds of the Hellenistic world lived, studied, and debated. Imagine a sprawling campus, silent at this late hour, the heavy night air hanging still and thick over its marble courtyards. We approach it slowly, taking in the sensation of cool stone beneath our bare feet. The library itself was just one part of this complex, but it was its beating heart, its repository of all accumulated knowledge of the known world. Think of the sheer volume. Not books as we know them, bound in leather and paper, but countless papyrus scrolls, each one an arduous task of scribes and copyists, representing years of concentrated thought and effort. The silence here is not empty. It is weighted with wisdom. Let us pause for a moment at the main entrance, a colossal archway carved with the figures of philosophers and mathematicians. The wood of the gate is dark, oiled, and utterly still. You notice the deep grooves worn into the marble floor just inside the gate, testament to the thousands upon thousands of sandals, bare feet, and chariots that have passed through this threshold over the centuries. But now it is quiet. The soft, rhythmic sound of the night watchman's slow, dragging footsteps can barely be heard far off in the main city streets. A sound that does not alarm, but rather confirms the deep peace surrounding us. The air here smells of several things. A complex perfume of ancient learning, the slightly sweet, dusty scent of papyrus, the earthy, metallic tang of the oil burning in the lamps, and a faint, residual aroma of sea salt carried in by the evening breeze, quickly absorbed by the surrounding dry, scholarly air. We pass through the outer porticos. These open-air walkways are lined with columns, their surface cool and smooth to the touch. In the daylight hours, this area would be filled with scholars pacing back and forth, reciting theorems to themselves, or engaging in fierce, low-voiced debates about astronomy, grammar, or medicine. But now, the silence is profound, interrupted only by the faintest whisper of wind moving through the high ceilings. The shadows here are long and deep, cast by the few distant moonbeams that manage to filter down from the rare breaks in the roofline. As we walk deeper into the complex, the sensation of time slowing down becomes palpable. There is no urgency here, no need for haste. Everything moves at the pace of contemplation. You can feel the sheer age of the structure, the immense weight of the scholarly devotion that went into its creation and maintenance. We are now approaching the main Hall of Scrolls, often referred to as the bibliothèque. It is here that the bulk of the collection resides, protected from the coastal humidity and the destructive pests common in ancient climates. The room is vast, high-ceilinged, and constructed with materials chosen specifically for their ability to maintain a cool, constant temperature year-round. Think of the immense cost, the meticulous engineering, and the sheer political will required to gather and house such a universal collection. This was not a small effort. It was the ultimate dedication to preserving human thought. The doors to the Bibliothecae are thick, heavy timber, reinforced with bronze to prevent warping. They are never truly locked, but merely latched, as a dedicated scribe or high-level scholar often needed access during the night to continue a crucial translation or verification project. We push one of these doors open, slowly, very slowly. The massive pivot hinge groans with a low, deep sound that quickly fades into the thickness of the stone walls. Stepping inside, you are immediately enveloped in a different quality of air. It is drier, cooler, and the scent of papyrus is much stronger here, almost intoxicating in its intensity. The main hall is lined, wall to wall, with endless rows of wooden shelving, separated by narrow walking aisles. These shelves do not hold books. They hold thousands upon thousands of small wooden compartments or armaria. Each armarium is a cubbyhole, carefully labelled and indexed. Within each armarium, the scrolls lie horizontally. A single scroll, when rolled up, is essentially a column of papyrus, tied with a simple linen cord, and often sealed with a small clay stamp bearing the title of the work and the name of the author. The true marvel is the indexing system, devised by scholars like Callimachus. The collection was catalogued in a monumental work known as the Pinakes, which acted as the subject index for the entire library. Imagine the tedious, repetitive work involved in reading every scroll, verifying its authenticity, assigning it a category, and then manually entering that information onto another scroll, which served as the catalogue. This was the work of hundreds of meticulous scribes, whose silent industry is the backbone of this entire establishment. We walk slowly down the central aisle. The lighting comes from scattered oil lamps, each one strategically placed on a small stand at the end of every few rows. The lamps cast a soft, dancing, golden light that illuminates the aisles, but leaves the top reaches of the ceiling and the far corners cloaked in deep shadow. This creates a sense of infinite, unexplored knowledge residing in the dark, just beyond the reach of the lamplight. Focus your attention on a single armarium, perhaps one labelled History, Herodotus. You gently reach out and touch the scroll inside. It feels surprisingly light, but dense with material. The outer surface, though often worn and slightly browned by time, still has the smooth, fibrous texture of the papyrus reed. The title tag, written in neat, small script, identifies the book and volume. The knowledge contained within this small, fragile cylinder is priceless. It represents centuries of observation, inquiry, and reporting. Think of the life cycle of one of these scrolls. First, the papyrus reeds, grown in the Nile Delta, were harvested, stripped, cut, laid in alternating layers, pressed, dried, and polished. Then, the careful, rhythmic work of the scribe, copying every letter by hand using a reed pen and carbon ink. Errors were constant, requiring tedious corrections. Finally, the scroll was rolled onto a central dowel, or umbilicus, often made of wood or bone, its ends sometimes decorated with protective knobs or cornua. This single scroll might contain a text we now know as just a chapter in a modern book, but to them it was a complete, monumental work. We continue our slow walk. Listen closely. There is no sound of conversation, only the faint, low-level creaking of the wooden shelves as the humidity slightly shifts, a soft, constant sighing from the vast structure under its own colossal weight. And perhaps, if you listen very, very carefully, you might hear the soft, rhythmic scratching of a single reed pen far off in the main reading room, where a dedicated scholar, lost to the hour, continues his work under the gentle glow of his own lamp. The atmosphere is heavy, with the profound silence of concentrated learning. Every artifact around us, every shelf, every label, every perfectly rolled scroll, is an ode to the tireless, anonymous work of thousands of people whose only goal was to preserve and understand the world. There is no pressure here, only the soft, ancient promise of uninterrupted knowledge. Allow the monotony of this endless row of scrolls to calm your mind as you slowly drift deeper into the profound silence of this forgotten place. We continue our quiet journey through the vast, slumbering complex of the Mouseion. Having passed through the main halls of the Bibliothèque, where the completed scrolls rest in silent rows, we now move toward an adjacent section, a place of intense, quiet industry, the Scriptorium. This is where the library's collection was multiplied, verified, and preserved. It is the engine room of knowledge dissemination, yet at this late hour, it is perhaps the quietest place of all. The air here carries a subtly different aroma. While the Bibliothèque smelled of dry, aged papyrus, the Scriptorium has a sharper, more immediate scent, the faint metallic tang of fresh carbon ink, and the distinct, grassy odour of newly prepared papyrus sheets. We enter a large, rectangular room. Unlike the storage halls, this room is designed for light. Natural light during the day, and intense lamplight at night. But now, only a few carefully shielded lamps are burning low, placed far apart, casting a muted, indirect illumination that barely allows us to distinguish the various workstations. Imagine rows and rows of long, narrow wooden tables. These are the desks of the scribes and copyists. During the busy daylight hours, this room would hum with the focused, rhythmic scratching of hundreds of reed pens moving across the papyrus surface. Now, the tables are empty. Their surfaces clean, but bearing the permanent marks of thousands of hours of repetitive labour. Small, faint circles where ink pots rested, and fine scratches where pens were sharpened. Look closely at one of the workstations. On the surface of the desk, you might see the simple tools of the scribe's trade. There is the reed pen, or calamus, sharpened to a fine point and slit down the middle to better hold and dispense the ink. There are small vials of water, used both to dilute the concentrated ink and to keep the pen tip moist. And there are small, rounded pumice stones, used to smooth the surface of the papyrus before writing, or to carefully scrape away an error. The preparation of the materials itself was a ritualistic, time-consuming process. The papyrus, once imported from the Nile, needed to be assessed for quality. The finest, whitest sheets were reserved for the most important texts. The ink, made from soot, carbon, mixed with gum arabic and water, had to be ground meticulously to achieve the perfect consistency, smooth enough to flow easily, yet dark enough to provide contrast on the slightly off-white papyrus. Consider the copyist's task. They were not simply writing. They were attempting to perfectly replicate an existing text, often one that was already decades or even centuries old. This required immense concentration and physical discipline. The scribe would typically sit with the original scroll resting on one knee, and the blank papyrus roll on the other. They would unroll the original, read a small section, commit it to memory, and then slowly, precisely, write it onto the new papyrus. The work was segmented into columns or paginae. As the scribe wrote one column, they would roll up the finished section and unroll the next blank area. This meant they were constantly managing two separate, heavy rolls of material, the source text and the new copy, all while maintaining the highest level of accuracy and penmanship. There was a constant low level of strain on the eyes, the neck, and the forearm. This was a monastic, repetitive, and deeply calming labor. Let us focus on the silence again. In the empty scriptorium, you can almost sense the accumulated fatigue of these anonymous workers. Each copied word represents a fraction of their life, carefully exchanged for the preservation of a larger idea. This relentless, monotonous effort is what saved the majority of the texts that reached us today. The work was not creative, it was purely preservative, and that very monotony is deeply relaxing to contemplate. Beyond the main copying area, we find the section dedicated to the correctors, or diorthotai. Their role was even more tedious and detail-oriented than that of the copyists. Once a scroll was copied, it was passed to the corrector, who would methodically read the new copy against the original, often syllable by syllable, searching for transcriptional errors, omissions, or misspellings. Imagine the absolute stillness required for this task. They would often use a specialized reading stand, tilting the scrolls just so, under a very bright, dedicated lamp. Their only tool might be a small stick or stylus to point to the exact words on the original and the copy, ensuring that their eyes did not skip a line or merge two similar words. This slow, deliberate process of error correction, of minute examination, speaks volumes about the value they placed on textual integrity. They were the ultimate guardians of accuracy. The correctors also had the job of establishing the canonical text, meaning they would compare multiple existing versions of a single work, say a play by Sophocles, and try to determine which version was the most authentic and closest to the author's original intent. This process involved detailed, scholarly debate, often documented in marginal notes or scholia, which themselves became valuable additions to the library's holdings. The marginalia itself is fascinating. In the daylight, scholars would often add their own observations or clarifications in tiny, precise handwriting around the main text. These weren't messy scribbles, but formal, acknowledged contributions to the textual tradition. When you look at an old scroll, you are not just seeing the author's words, but the accumulated insights and observations of countless minds over the centuries. We move toward a smaller room attached to the scriptorium, a room dedicated to the bookbinders and finishers. This is where the scroll truly became a finished product. Here the long roll of papyrus, now complete with text, was prepared for storage. The edges were sometimes trimmed, the back surface rubbed with cedar oil to deter insects and add flexibility, and a title strip, or syllabus, was often glued to the exposed outer surface, hanging down like a small tag for easy identification when stored in the armaria. The oiling process is particularly soothing to imagine. the finisher would use a soft cloth or sponge, very slowly and evenly, rubbing the oil across the brittle papyrus, bringing out a deeper hue and a slight sheen, protecting the fragile material. The rhythmic, repetitive action of rubbing and polishing would dominate this room's daytime activity. Now, the cloths lie folded, the cedar oil scent lingers faintly in the cool air, and the tools of the trade are stacked neatly. All these minute details, the ink, the pen, the oil, the precise seating arrangements, the silent corrections, tell a story not of great historical events, but of the immense, anonymous human effort required to preserve time itself in written form. It is the story of quiet devotion, of patience, and of a shared belief in the enduring power of knowledge. Allow your mind to focus on the soft, dry scent of the ink. Imagine the gentle pressure of the reed pen against the papyrus fibers. Hear the silent concentration of the copyist, working methodically, page after page, hour after hour. There is nothing to stimulate, nothing to excite. Only the calm, reassuring reality of repetitive work, the foundation upon which this magnificent library was built. We leave the hushed intensity of the Scriptorium and move now to the parts of the Mouseion dedicated to the minds that animated this vast collection, the resident scholars. These men, often invited from across the Hellenistic world by the Ptolemaic kings, were given residence, stipends, and most importantly, unparalleled access to the library's resources. Think of this place not just as a library, but as a vast, ancient retreat for thought. The scholars' quarters were arranged around quiet, shaded cloisters and small, private gardens. At this hour, the gardens are filled with the heavy, sweet scent of night-blooming jasmine and the gentle, constant drip of water from a small, decorative fountain, a sound that has provided background rhythm to profound thought for centuries. We walk through one of these cloisters. The columns here are simpler, less ornate than those leading to the public areas, suggesting a focus on utility and peace rather than grandeur. The ground is paved with smooth, cool stone, slightly concave in the center of the path, where the most frequent footsteps have fallen over the centuries. We approach the living quarters. Each scholar was typically given a small, private apartment. It was a space designed for monastic solitude. A simple bed, a sturdy wooden chest for personal belongings, and the single most important piece of furniture, a large, wide writing desk. Imagine the contents of such a room. No distractions. The walls are plain plaster, perhaps adorned only with a few maps or astronomical diagrams meticulously drawn by the resident himself. The light is minimal, relying on a small, steady oil lamp designed to burn cleanly for many hours without frequent refilling. The purpose of this entire living space was singular: to facilitate uninterrupted research and contemplation. The daily rhythm of these scholars was one of slow, deliberate routine. Their day was governed not by external demands, but by the internal requirements of their subject matter. They would rise with the sun, perform a few light rituals or prayers, and then immediately proceed to the dining hall for a communal yet silent breakfast. This routine created a sense of order and predictability, which is often the silent ally of deep intellectual work. From breakfast, the bulk of their morning was spent in the main reading rooms or the private study alcoves. This was the time for concentrated work, comparing texts, translating documents, or simply reading through the newly copied scrolls that had arrived overnight from the Scriptorium. This was serious reading, slow, focused, and often requiring the reader to physically unroll the scroll column by column, a repetitive manual process that enforced a disciplined pace. Focus on the sound of the reading room during the day. It was not silent in the way we experience silence today. It was filled with a low, continuous, monotone murmur. Since reading silently was a specialized skill, many scholars would read aloud to themselves, a soft, repetitive hum of Greek, Latin, or Egyptian echoing through the vast space. At the hour we visit now, that sound is absent, leaving a void that is even more profound. The scholars maintained very specific, slow protocols for obtaining texts. A resident scholar would present a request to one of the librarians, who oversaw the main collection. The request was not fulfilled instantly. A servant or bibliothecarius would be dispatched to the stacks, often carrying a small wax tablet to help remember the exact location and title. This process, which might take a considerable amount of time, fostered patience and respect for the rarity of the materials. Imagine the servant's walk, slow, deliberate, passing row after row of silent armoria, his lamp casting moving shadows on the titles. The selection must be precise. Once found, the scroll is handled with extreme care, carried back to the scholar on a small, clean piece of linen to prevent damage from sweat or dirt. The scroll was treated not merely as paper, but as a consecrated vessel of knowledge. The afternoons were often dedicated to discussion, or symposia. These were not rapid-fire debates, but slow, thoughtful exchanges of ideas, usually centered around a single, complex text or philosophical problem. These discussions often took place in the open air of the cloisters, or in a communal exedra, a semicircular bench, the voices kept low, the movements slow. There was no rush to conclusion, only the commitment to thorough inquiry. Even the food consumed by the scholars was chosen for its effect on intellectual clarity. Simple fare: olives, bread, cheese, figs, and diluted wine. Everything was designed to keep the mind sharp, the body rested, and the routine unchanging. The entire environment was a machine dedicated to deep, uninterrupted contemplation. As we stand here now, in the quiet heart of their residential area, you can feel the residual energy of centuries of thought. The air is still. The heavy stone walls absorb all external noise, leaving behind only the comforting sounds of the natural world. The distant sound of a single owl, the soft rustle of dry leaves in the small garden. The rules for life within the Mouseion were strict but simple, all designed to enforce a peaceful existence. No loud noises, no uninvited guests. Respect for the texts was absolute, and any mistreatment of a scroll, any accidental tear or smudge, was met with serious disciplinary action. This deep reverence for the material contributed to the overall atmosphere of calm. Focus on the stillness, the lack of hurry, the certainty that your work will be there tomorrow and the day after. This slow, predictable environment is the ultimate antidote to the anxious, hurried modern mind. It is a place where time slows to the pace of the hand copying text, where the greatest ambition is merely to fully understand one single ancient idea. Let the profound slowness of this ancient routine settle deep into your own mind, soothing away any residual restlessness. We now turn our attention to the meticulous, unseen infrastructure required to simply maintain the library's massive collection. This is not about the grand ideas contained within the scrolls, but the quiet, physical reality of the material itself. Papyrus. Papyrus, the chief medium of the library, is fundamentally an organic, perishable substance. It is susceptible to insects, moisture, dryness, and the simple decay of time. The very act of preservation at Alexandria was a constant, slow battle against the natural world. We move toward the specialized storage areas, separated from the main bibliothèque, dedicated solely to the raw materials and the tools of maintenance. These rooms are kept particularly cool and dry, monitored constantly by specialized conservators, whose work was less glamorous than the scholars, but infinitely more vital to the library's survival. Imagine the atmosphere in the papyrus preparation room. Here, the raw, dried sheets imported from the Nile Delta were carefully inspected. The quality varied immensely. The finest sheets, those made from the whitest, clearest part of the reed, were destined for official records or primary copies of classic texts. The coarser, cheaper sheets were used for working drafts or less important documents. The conservators would gently unfold the packed layers of papyrus, listening closely for the telltale crackle of dryness or the soft mushiness that indicated humidity damage. Each sheet was carefully examined for signs of insect damage, tiny pinholes or tracks left by bookworms and beetles, the constant, silent destroyers of ancient knowledge. The process of joining individual sheets into a long scroll or volumen was a slow, delicate craft. Sheets were overlapped slightly and joined using a thin layer of natural glue, then pressed flat. The joint had to be strong enough to withstand rolling and unrolling, yet flexible enough not to crack. Imagine the conservator's hands, slow, steady, applying the exact right amount of adhesive, ensuring the fibers aligned perfectly. This repetitive manual task embodies the patience required by this entire institution. Next, consider the constant, slow fight against humidity. Alexandria's location, right on the Mediterranean coast, meant the air was often laden with moisture, the enemy of papyrus. The architectural design of the bibliothèque and the storage rooms was crucial. Walls were thick, sometimes doubled to provide insulation. Windows were small and high, limiting the influx of damp air while still allowing minimal ventilation. Within the storage armaria, small unglazed clay vessels, filled with desiccants, such as certain types of dry earth or ashes, were strategically placed to absorb excess moisture. The job of the conservators included the monotonous, rhythmic task of checking these vessels daily, replacing the damp material with fresh, dry, absorbent material. This involved slow, careful bending, reaching into the deep recesses of the shelves, and meticulously logging the moisture levels. Now, let's focus on the preventative measures against pests. As mentioned, insects were a huge threat. The most effective preventative measure was the widespread use of cedar oil and other natural repellents. The finishing of the scrolls involved rubbing the papyrus with oil, and the wooden storage shelves themselves were sometimes constructed of insect-resistant cedar wood, or regularly treated with oil. Imagine the scent, the distinct, slightly pungent yet soothing aroma of cedar oil permeating the entire storage wing. The conservators would slowly move along the rows, applying thin coats of oil to the wooden armaria, ensuring every crack and joint was protected. The slow, circular motion of the oiling cloth, the rhythmic sound of the cloth dragging across the grain of the ancient wood, a profound testament to silent vigilance. When a scroll was damaged, perhaps a tear from rough handling or ink fading from age, the restoration process was itself a slow meditation. The conservator would carefully unroll the damaged scroll, often laying it flat on a weighted, clean linen cloth. Repairs were done using thin strips of fresh papyrus and a light adhesive, carefully placed under a magnifying lens fashioned from clear rock crystal. The repair had to be strong, yet virtually invisible. This was the work of hands moving with glacial slowness and absolute precision. Think of the damage log, a separate, meticulously kept scroll detailing every repair, every instance of insect damage, and every successful preservation effort. This log was a record not of knowledge, but of the struggle to maintain knowledge. The names in the log are forgotten, but their slow, dedicated work is the reason some of the most famous texts survived long enough to be copied again. The inventory system itself was also designed to manage the physical health of the scrolls. Every scroll had a scheduled checkup. Once every few years, each scroll in the vast collection would be slowly pulled from its armorium, unrolled slightly, inspected, cleaned with a soft brush, re-oiled if necessary, and carefully reshelved. The sheer scale of this task, the monotonous repetition of inspecting thousands upon thousands of cylindrical rolls, meant that this cycle was a never-ending process. It was the constant, low-level background noise of the library's existence. Let your mind drift into the quiet rhythm of this preservation work. The soft whisper of the brush against the papyrus surface, the gentle clunk of a scroll being replaced in its cubbyhole, the faint, steady scent of the protective cedar oil surrounding you. There is no drama, no excitement, only the profound peace found in the slow, essential management of perishable material. This relentless focus on the minute, physical reality of the text is deeply calming, a powerful reminder of patience and dedication. We turn now to contemplate the very architecture of the Mouseion and its library, not as monumental sites, but as quiet, functional spaces designed specifically to host and protect the vastness of human knowledge. The structure itself was a quiet, philosophical statement. We begin by moving toward the reading alcoves. These were not vast open spaces, but rather smaller, semi-private rooms, or recessed areas designed for individual scholarly work. These alcoves provided a necessary degree of separation and quietude for those engaged in particularly difficult or sensitive translation work. Imagine a row of these small, cell-like spaces along an inner wall. Each alcove is just large enough to comfortably accommodate one scholar and his reading materials. The lighting within each is controlled by a single, specialized oil lamp, often positioned in a niche designed to minimize shadows and glare on the papyrus. The walls of these alcoves were built thick, using heavy stone and mortar, specifically to dampen sound. The effect is one of profound, contained silence. Feel the texture of the stone that frames these alcoves. It is cool and perhaps slightly rougher than the highly polished marble of the main porticos, a tactile reminder of the practical, monastic nature of the work done here. The furniture is simple, a heavy, sturdy wooden table, designed to hold several unrolled scrolls without strain, and a simple stool. Everything is functional, minimalist, and designed to eliminate distraction. The physical layout of the Mouseion was deliberately complex, functioning almost like a city of its own, but one built on slow, deliberate movement. There were the public spaces, the residential quarters, the Scriptorium, and the storage wings, all connected by long, winding corridors and colonnades. Walking these corridors at night is a deeply soothing experience. The colonnades are supported by pillars, arranged in a repetitive, rhythmic sequence. Look down the long, receding line of pillars. The light from a distant lamp casts long, slender shadows that repeat and stretch with perfect monotony. The sound of your slow, dragging footsteps echoes softly for a moment before being absorbed by the ancient stone. This repetition, this visual and acoustic rhythm, is profoundly calming to the restless mind. The dining hall, or refectory, was another architecturally significant area, not for its grandeur, but for its communal simplicity. It was a long, rectangular hall with plain wooden tables and benches. The very design encouraged low voices and slow movement. The stone floor and high vaulted ceiling meant that any loud noise would reverberate unpleasantly, serving as a natural deterrent to boisterous behavior. During the daytime, the scholars would eat simple, shared meals here. The soundscape would be one of low, repetitive noises. The gentle clink of earthenware bowls, the soft chewing of dried bread, and the low, collective hum of quiet conversation about theorems or texts. Now the hall is empty, the long tables scrubbed clean, the silence absolute. You can almost smell the residual scent of dried herbs and simple grain still lingering in the cold air. Let us consider the drainage and water systems. While not glamorous, the management of water was key to the library's survival. The Mouseion had a complex system of cisterns and subterranean channels designed to collect rainwater, providing cool, clean water for the residents, and crucially, maintaining a stable temperature and humidity level in certain sensitive storage areas. Imagine the slow, constant movement of water deep beneath the stone foundations, a barely audible drip, or a low, gurgling sound from the channels. This hidden, repetitive sound is the constant, quiet pulse of the structure, working tirelessly to support the fragile collection above. This sound of hidden, functional engineering is deeply relaxing, a mechanical version of the natural ambient noise. We move now to the upper vaults, or specialized scroll storage. It is believed that some of the most precious or rarely accessed texts were stored on higher levels, further away from the ground moisture. Access to these vaults was difficult, via narrow, winding stone staircases. Climb these stairs slowly. The stone steps are steep and uneven, worn heavily in the center by centuries of ascent and descent. The only sound is the gentle, muffled thud of your feet against the stone. With every step upwards, the air becomes slightly drier, slightly cooler. The act of ascending, of moving slowly and methodically, is itself a meditative exercise. Reaching the upper vault, the silence is intense. Here, the armaria might be smaller, more heavily sealed. The scrolls here are often older, wrapped perhaps in linen cloth for extra protection. The light filtering in from the tiny high windows is thin and grey. These are the forgotten treasures, the knowledge that sleeps soundly, awaiting the rare scholar who needs its specific wisdom. The silence here is not empty. It is a profound, protective blanket. Let your mind settle on the sheer scale of this building. Designed not for show, but for the patient pursuit of detail. The repetitive rows of columns, the predictable layout of the rooms, the thick, sound-dampening walls. Every feature enforces a discipline of slow movement and quiet thought. There is no haste in this architecture, only the commitment to permanence and peace. We now delve into the abstract, yet equally physical, heart of the library, the systems of organization. A collection of 500,000 scrolls is not knowledge. It is merely a pile of papyrus until it can be systematically accessed. The slow, meticulous process of cataloguing was the true magic of Alexandria. We enter the cataloguing wing, a section perhaps even quieter than the Scriptorium, as it demands the highest level of unbroken concentration. The air here feels heavy with the scent of dried clay and meticulous, patient order. The foundation of this system was the monumental work known as the Pinakes. This was not a single book, but a series of scrolls, a multi-volume catalogue or bibliography created by the scholar Callimachus and his successors. It was the master key to the entire library. Imagine the sheer scale of this project. It was the first systematic attempt to list and describe every known work of literature and science in the world. The scribes and cataloguers worked for decades, perhaps over a century, to create this comprehensive map of human knowledge. The process began when a new scroll was acquired, often from foreign ports or as a copy from an older source. The first step was verification. The scroll was handed to a senior scholar who specialized in that specific field, say epic poetry or geometry. They would slowly and carefully unroll the entire scroll, reading it word by word, not just for content, but to establish its authenticity. Was this truly a work of Homer or a forgery? This slow, scholarly verification could take weeks for a single, long text. Once verified, the scroll moved to the attribution stage. The cataloguer had to determine the precise title, the author's full name, the author's birthplace, and, crucially, a brief summary of the scroll's contents. This required referencing biographical scrolls, historical records, and scholarly commentaries. A slow, iterative search through the library itself. The cataloguing staff worked at long, segmented tables. Each table was dedicated to a specific section of the Pinakes, such as poetry, history, or philosophy. The tools were simple: a reed pen, a pot of ink, and a large, clean surface of papyrus, destined to become part of the catalogue scroll. Let us focus on the physical act of entry. The cataloguer would select the correct catalogue scroll for the section, unroll it to the proper point, and then, slowly and precisely, write the entry. Each entry followed a strict, repetitive format. First, author's name, written clearly and slowly. Second, author's origin, the city or country of birth. Scroll title, the exact, established title of the work. Final, number of lines, a precise count of the total lines of text on the original scroll. This was a crucial piece of information for verification and copying. Counting thousands of lines, one by one, was the epitome of monotonous labor. Opening words, the first few words of the scroll, acting as an additional identifier. Brief summary, a short, dry description of the content. Imagine the cataloguer's hand moving across the papyrus surface, performing the same highly structured, repetitive task, hundreds of times each day. The slow, scraping sound of the pen, the low whisper of the cataloguer reciting the title to himself for accuracy, the repetitive gesture of rolling the Pinakes scroll forward and rolling the previous section backward. This rhythm of cataloguing is a hypnotic, deeply calming sequence of motions. The Pinakes was organized into 10 major categories, a classification that imposed order on the entire history of human thought. The arrangement within each category was often alphabetical by the author's name. Imagine the slow, mental effort required to correctly alphabetize the names and titles in Greek, a process that must be absolutely perfect, or the text would be lost forever within the immensity of the collection. The process was so slow, so detailed, that an entry might take half an hour to complete, requiring the cross-referencing of 3 or 4 other texts. The cataloguer could not be rushed. Accuracy was paramount. Speed was irrelevant. This commitment to slowness is what saved the legacy of the classical world. Now, consider the physical labeling. Once a work was catalogued, the actual scroll was physically prepared for storage. A small tag, the syllabus, was attached to the outside of the scroll, containing the scroll's identifier and category number. The lettering on the syllabus had to be clear, precise, and permanent. The cataloguer would slowly measure the small papyrus tag, cut it with a sharp bronze knife, and carefully affix it to the scroll using a weak glue that would not damage the ancient material. The process of shelf assignment was the final critical step. The scrolls were arranged not just by author, but by volume size and subject category, and then given a specific, permanent armarium number, a precise address within the colossal building. The cataloguer would meticulously record this final location on the Pinakes entry, closing the loop of the entire organizational system. Imagine the cataloging wing at midnight. The empty desks. The silence is broken only by the faint, steady dripping of an oil lamp wick absorbing its fuel. The scent of ink and dry paper is strongest here, a memorial to the thousands of hours spent on the silent, methodical labor of imposing order on chaos. The work was endless, repetitive, and deeply necessary. Let your mind drift into the repetitive structures of the Pinakes, the hundreds of times the author's name was written, the thousands of lines that were counted, the infinite scrolls that were assigned a permanent home. This slow, predictable, and exhaustive focus on organizational detail is the ultimate soothing agent for the busy mind. The very concept of perfect, unchanging order is deeply restful. We now shift our focus to the methods by which the Great Library grew, not through warfare or conquest, but through a patient, dedicated, and often quiet diplomacy, the acquisition of texts. This process was itself a masterpiece of slow, bureaucratic effort, involving verification, transcription, and extensive travel. Think of the library as a vast, intellectual vacuum, constantly drawing in knowledge from every corner of the known world. This was not a passive endeavor. It required active, organized hunting for texts, a scholarly pursuit that often took years to yield a single valuable scroll. The primary method of acquisition involved specialized text agents, or bibliophiles, dispatched by the Ptolemaic kings. These agents were highly educated men, skilled in languages and experienced in the subtle negotiations of the ancient marketplace. Their travels were slow, relying on sailing ships, slow-moving caravans, and arduous land journeys. Imagine the text agent's journey. He might spend months traveling to Athens, Rhodes, Babylon, or even further east. His mission was simple: locate the most authoritative, oldest, and most reliable copies of important works. Works of drama, history, mathematics, or philosophy that were not yet in the Alexandrian collection. The acquisition was rarely a swift purchase. More often, it involved long, quiet negotiations with private collectors, temple libraries, or the families of deceased scholars. The agent had to use charm, patience, and the backing of the Alexandrian court's vast wealth to convince an owner to part with a treasured, often ancestral, scroll. This process required a profound slowness, a respectful, almost ceremonial approach to the transfer of knowledge. Once a desired scroll was acquired, or simply loaned for copying, the security and transport procedures were meticulous. The scroll was immediately wrapped in multiple layers of protective linen cloth, often sealed with the clay stamp of the Alexandrian agent, and placed inside a specially constructed, a private linen cloth, cedar-lined wooden chest designed to resist moisture and insects during the long journey back to Egypt. The journey back was itself a study in slow, continuous vigilance. The agent was personally responsible for the chest. On a ship, the chest would be secured in the driest, safest part of the hold, constantly monitored for dampness. On land, it would be secured to the center of the caravan, protected by guards, its safety the paramount concern above all other cargo. The rhythmic creaking of the ship's timbers, or the monotonous clip-plop of the caravan's animals, would be the constant, unchanging soundtrack to this process of moving knowledge across vast distances. A critical, non-negotiable rule of the library involved every ship entering the port. This famous decree stipulated that every ship docking in Alexandria that carried scrolls of any kind had to surrender them to the library authorities. Process, known as the ship tax or ship seizure, was another bureaucratic marvel of slowness. Imagine the scene at the docks. A small, specialized team of library officials, a clerk, a scribe, and an armed guard, would board the arriving vessel. They would inspect the cargo manifest and the personal belongings of the merchants and passengers. All scrolls found were gently removed and transported immediately to the library. The scrolls were not immediately added to the collection. First, they were taken to a holding area near the Scriptorium, where the lengthy verification and assessment process began. Each scroll was slowly unrolled, read, and compared against the Pinakes to see if it was a duplicate. If it was a duplicate, the crucial question was, is it a better, older, or more accurate copy? This required detailed scholarly comparison, often line by line, against the existing Alexandrian version. If the new scroll was found to be superior, it would be retained, catalogued as the new master copy, and the inferior previous copy would be downgraded, sometimes relegated to a less accessible storage area. If the scroll was determined to be a new work, it would immediately enter the full, slow cataloging cycle we discussed previously. Verification, attribution, line counting, summary writing, and finally, shelf assignment. In the case of texts seized from ships, the owners were eventually given a choice. They could pay a fee for the library to make a copy, or they might be given a copy and the original kept by the library. A rather diplomatic seizure. The scrolls returned to the owners were meticulously marked with a permanent tag stating that they were the copy from the Alexandria deposit, a badge of scholarly honor, confirming the text's legitimacy. This systematic process, the slow acquisition by agents, the slow scrutiny on the docks, the slow comparison of texts, the slow, precise recataloguing, represents a profound dedication to quality over speed. No scroll was hastily incorporated. Every piece of incoming knowledge was made to wait, to be examined, compared, and verified by the vast, slow-moving, administrative machine of the Mouseion. The financial records related to this acquisition process were themselves vast. The payments made to scribes, the expenses for cedar oil and protective linen, the stipends for traveling agents, and the often immense sums paid for rare original texts were all meticulously recorded on hundreds of smaller administrative scrolls. The slow annual auditing of these financial scrolls was another layer of repetitive, calming administrative labor. Let your mind settle on the profound, quiet bureaucracy involved in this intellectual collecting. The slow movement of the ship into the harbor, the gentle removal of the scrolls by the library team, the faint, rhythmic sound of the clerk's pen recording the titles of the seized texts, the endless, calm vigilance required to turn random, scattered pieces of writing into the world's most comprehensive, organized repository of wisdom. This process, slow and monotonous, is the true background hum of the library.